All right, so in this lesson of the step 401, we're going to go ahead and we're going to go after our progress bar. The progress bar is when we load the page and we see it coming up in here. And basically it's an indicator that lets people know something's happening, keeps them hanging on, keeps them coming back, prevents them from jumping away from the page, especially on a web application when you have data to load that has to be loaded that first time. The great part about a progress bar that we're going to make is that we're going to make it in such a way that we'll be able to use it again and again and again for different purposes. So with that said, we've got done making our branch and we've checked everything, localhost working well, everything's up to date, we're good to go. And at this point we're going to go ahead and get started on our progress bar. The first thing that we're going to do is, in this class in JavaScript, we're not so worried about learning CSS and other things. We want to be more focused on the idea of learning JavaScript. And so I will provide the resources of different external resources that we might leverage throughout the building of our application, and encourage you at any time to ask questions if there's any confusion. But the first thing that we're going to do is, you see I just made a little room in my header in my head, and what I'm going to put in here is Bootstrap, and it's a CDN link. It's in the homework. You'll see it there. It's available to you. The whole link is available, and what this is going to do is basically pull in all the CSS for Bootstrap, which allows us to be responsive and gives us out-of-the-box styling, which is really nice and useful. And in this case, it's what will give our progress bar the blue in the bar and the spinning background, and just make it look nice for us. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to hit save on that, and we can actually at this point go ahead and close our index.html. Now we're going to, of course, go ahead and I wanted to make sure I was on the right branch. Would hate to have to start over again. We're going to go ahead and start on our progress bar, but there was one thing that we needed to do yet. We left a little junk behind in our last video. We failed to delete the application tagline variable, so let's go ahead and let's just get that out of the way and get that cleaned up. Hit save. And at this point, where we're going to want to put our progress bar is, if you see, we're actually putting it inside of, if I go ahead and I inspect, you'll see that we're squeezing it in there right after. Let me get this open for you. We can see the progress bar here. We can see the DOM being updated, by the way. And we can see that we have it down inside our main. And we're just inserting it into our main. The way that we do that is, I'll show you and then I'll explain it to you. What we want to do is we want to take code in our JS, and right down here at the bottom after the footer, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paste this code in, and then I'll explain it and I'll actually show you how we use it. What you can see is basically I'm saying just to inject some HTML code. What does that HTML code look like? What is it? Well, when it's formatted and it looks good, I can come over here and I can just go ahead and create a new page real quick, and so I can show you. If I paste it in here, this is what it looks like unformatted. You can see we have some inline styles, they're divs. We have an ID of loader progress bar, which is used by Bootstrap to give it the styling, and it allows us to update information, as you'll see, in the functions and things, which is for the remainder of this step, we're focused on functions and leveraging those functions, and learn a couple few things on the web. Once you have your progress bar laid out, right? Once we actually have a progress bar laid out, what we want to do, because we want to put it in JavaScript, and if you notice I'm using all double quotes, by the way, too, is we want to collapse it all down to one line. That way, when we put it into our JavaScript, it looks much nicer. I'm going to go ahead and close that and not save it. And you can see this is all one line. You can look over here. It's all one line because what we're doing is we're feeding it like a string. Additionally, because we know we're using double quotes, we'll use single quotes out here to define the string. If we actually use double quotes to define the string, what we would end up with is bad code. So our string's ready. It's in there. We're good. No errors or anything. And what we're doing here, we're familiar with what we did up here, which was basically inject some HTML inside of the DOM into the main. Here, what we're doing, when we do this, if we inject this inside the main and something else is in there and we just use equals, it replaces what's in there. By putting the plus, what's happening is it's saying add this to what's already in there, and this will append it in there. So with that, at this point, what we can do is we can actually save it. We have our bootstrap in our index file, and we can save it, and we can go out and we can take a look. And we didn't take a look when we did last put our bootstrap in, so we might have missed an opportunity to see if it changed anything on us. And what we can see is that it did change some of the body styling, and we do have our progress bar in there. In our progress bar, nothing's happening because we need to, with JavaScript, we need to tell it to do something with it. And so what we'll do now is we'll go back and let's tell our progress bar to do something. For now, we're just going to go ahead and put some code in there that will basically display the progress bar, but it will do kind of like a fake count, so that what we can do is see it work. And at the moment, what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable called timer count. And the reason we're going to create this is, and we're going to set it out here, is because we're going to create a function called displayPB. And you'll see inside here that we're actually going to call that function, and this is called recursion. We're going to call it again and again from inside this conditional statement. And what this conditional statement is basically taking this timer count, it's set to 0 initially. When we come inside, it says if timer count is less than 100, do this code block. Else, set the timer count back to 0 and return, we'll just go with return false. And what that'll do is that'll stop the whole process. So what'll happen? Timer count will go 0. When it comes in as 0, we'll set a variable to X, and we'll essentially say if timer count, and what we're doing in here right now is we're putting that loading text in there. And for the way that it loads, let's comment this out for right now, and we'll get back to that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. What happens when it comes inside here? It says get element by ID, which is our progress bar, and we're going to tell it to set innerHTML. And what we need to do, actually, so we have to start up here. But what we'll do for right now is we'll tell it to set HTML to, let's just use the timer count for now, because that's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So if we set that in there, we're telling it to set the innerHTML to that number. And then we're saying to set the set attribute, which what we're doing is we're setting an attribute inside there so that the progress bar and its functionality built into Bootstrap has that number and knows what that number is. Plus, if we want to watch it, that's where we'll watch it. We'll watch after this value now. And then we'll say get the progress bar again as well. And what we want to do is we want to say style width. and we're setting it to the timer count plus the percent sign. And what that will do is 0%, 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%. And if we go out, and we'll actually see that come into play. Then we're going to use the setTimeout function, which is something that we're learning about in this lesson as well. And what we're saying is, hey, every 200 milliseconds, not every, but in 200 milliseconds, call this function, which means it'll come up here and it'll start this again, except this time the timer count will be 1. And it'll keep doing that until it hits 100. And when it hits 100, it'll come down here and it'll stop the process, the loop from happening. So if I go ahead and I hit save and I come out to our page and I hit refresh, first of all, nothing's going to happen. And the reason nothing's going to happen is because what we failed to do is we have to, up inside of our init, right, our application, initializeApplication function, we have to let it know after everything's been loaded there. We have to call the function and tell it to begin. So now at this point, if I hit save, and if I come out and I do a refresh, we can see exactly what I was showing. And it hit 100 and it stopped. If we want that to be complete, a complete 100, what we can do is we can say 101. Or we could say less than or equal to 100. And so now if we do it, and I'm going to speed up that process a little by decreasing that time a little bit so we don't spend so much time watching the bar, and I do a refresh, you can see it's going a lot faster. And we hit 100 and it stopped. So pretty cool stuff. But at this point, we also want to show some information in the bar, letting them know that it's loading. Most people would get it. And so what we can do is we can come down here and without going after this whole thing, I think we'll come back to making this a little better in a minute or two. But what we can do is we can define our var x, and we can say that it is equal to timer count percent, semicolon. And all that's going to do, if we take x now and we put it here and we hit save, what we can see that does for us is it will actually give us the percent sign on the back of the number. So that's great, but we actually want them to know it's loading. So one of the things that we can do is take that a step further, and we can add the code like this. And so what that'll do is we need to put there we go, a string loading application, timer count, right? Add the timer count in there and then have it come down there. And if we hit save and we go back, and let's make the loading a little bit faster. We can see that it's kind of stuck and it's fighting with itself in there, trying to show that information. So we can actually even take that a step further if we want to. And what we're doing up here, now we'll transition over to this line. We'll get rid of that, we'll get rid of the comments, and we'll take a look here. This is a shorthand if statement. What this is saying is if timer count is less than 15, then don't put anything in there. Else, right, so this is So, sorry, if timer count less than 15, do this. Else, if timer count less than 30, do this. Else, if timer count less than 60, do this. Else, do this. And what we're doing is we're slowly adding in the information so that it doesn't get all wonky in there the way that we were watching it. And if I go back and I do a refresh and I take a look now, you'll see loading kicks in, application kicks in, and there we have it. And there's our progress bar. So again, to review real quick, what we're doing is we're injecting some HTML, the progress bar itself, and then we're calling a function that's going to leverage the progress bar. The first time the JavaScript runs, it's going to set this timer count, and that's going to be available. When we call the progress bar, what we're going to do is check and make sure that we're not over 100, that we're less than or equal to 100. And if we are, that means execute this code block in here. If we're over 100, if we're at 101, then just timer count, set timer count back to 0 and return false. In here is where we have we're setting a variable of x, and we're going through a bunch of conditions, which is what each of these is, and we're appending text to it. And honestly, I think that we could bump that up to at least 40 and bump this up to at least 20 so that we saw how it kind of, the loading overlapped itself. So let's see if that took care of that, so it looks good. There we go. There we go. That's not too bad. But if you watch, if we go in and we actually just go ahead and do 5 more, I think that we won't even see that flop. We'll just see it kind of add on. Save. %. There we go. Loading application. Still could use maybe 5 more. If we try that. Here we go. So we have no wrapping, no nothing. Looks nice and clean. So what we're doing is we're just updating information by using the ID of the element that the progress bar is, and we're putting that, overlaying that HTML. The progress bar actually happens in the background, and that's controlled through the array value now attribute. Then we're also taking our document, looking at it again, and we're setting a width for the timer count. And that width is what allows that bar to grow, that blue bar to grow. So each time we're incrementing it by 1%. And then we're saying set that counter to its current value +1. That's what ++ is. And then we're coming in, we're saying set timeout. So we're basically telling JavaScript, wait for whatever time we put over here, and then call this function. And it's calling itself again, and it just keeps repeating until it hits 101. And when it hits 101, it comes down and it returns false. And that is our progress bar. So now we have our progress bar in, and we are ready to save and close. We'll go out to our commander. We'll come in and do a git status. We can see our pages that updated, and we'll go ahead and do a git add. And we've added those to the staging area, so we can go back and do another git status, and we see that they're ready to go. At this point, what we can do is our commit git commit -m added progress bar comma displayPB function and removed application tagline variable in app.js. Also added CDN link for bootstrap in the index.html file. And we'll commit it. And at this point, we're committed and we're good. So in our next video, we'll push the branch to GitHub and we'll go ahead and get everything out to production.